possible to get a 5-second countdown? Like a 30
You have to wait for all the
is
buffery things to
ridiculously
happen.
long.
Yeah, to us it's long.
That's what's
but to
really
everyone
happening
else
behind the scenes.
It might only be 5 seconds, you see. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of This Week in Science Live. As you can see, it's just me and Justin tonight. We are going to get started in a moment on the podcast taping. But if you are watching here today on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook, I think those are all the things, then you're going to get everything. You're going to get all the little in-betweens and all that good stuff. But if you don't like that, then turn this off and just listen to the audio podcast that drops later this week. I'm kidding. I'm glad you're here. But we're going to get started.
I've been informed that countdown is only 5 seconds to the audience. Okay.
That's why it's 30 seconds, because it takes, the interwebs have to receive the feed into the various locations once I hit go live.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can only move at the speed of light, Justin.
I thought that was faster. I don't know.
This was slow light, it turns out. Some of that sluggish, goopy light, you know? Okay, well, anywho, I am piloting, and I have been gone for 2 weeks, and so I'm a little punchy, so I apologize in advance. And every time Kiki asks me to host the show, I have to relearn how to do it all, so it's always kind of fun. But hey, thanks for being along for the ride. Justin, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode 1009, recorded on Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. It's just so taxing. Hi, everybody. Today, we are going to fill your heads with new life, venomous viruses, and road rage. But first...
Disclaimer. Before we get into the science, let's do a quick refresher on tariffs. Tariffs aren't typical science fare, but in the general interest of fact-splaining, let's explain what they are. A tax. Essentially, a sales tax. But they work slightly differently. A sales tax is applied to consumer goods when you buy a product. A tariff is a tax on imported goods, usually paid for by the importer initially, but then that price is passed on to the consumer at the register, which is basically like a sales tax. They're typically applied to select goods in an effort to protect the native manufacturing. A blanket tariff is then essentially a sales tax on anything that's imported, and that's basically going to fall onto the consumers. Blanket tariffs are sales taxes, specifically targeting consumers, and they are consumer burden in the end. Nobody, well, that's not quite true, but almost nobody sane, and nobody's sane, has ever suggested adding tariffs as a way to combat inflation. Blanket tariffs especially make all the imported goods more expensive, which then is the definition of higher inflation when things get more expensive. They also tend to affect financially disadvantaged people more than wealthy ones, as the wealthy spend much smaller percentages of their incomes on consumer goods, therefore contribute a smaller portion of their income to sales tax or tariff increases. Tariffs are not necessarily a bad thing. They can make domestic products more competitive, protecting worker wages in industries and manufacturing. It is a common tactic, in fact, of most social democracies to put tariffs on imported goods. Then those taxes can be used to support social services, universal health care, education, scientific research. In a social democracy, that's where that money goes. But to apply them after 40 years of outsourcing in a post-manufacturing economy while dismantling government services, education, investment in science, the things that those taxes could have contributed to. Following that up with tax cuts for the wealthy, who are, again, not personally affected by the sales tax increase, tariff increase, as it represents a small change to the margin of the margins to them. Just got to keep moving that decimal place over to anything that you're buying compared to what that cost will seem like or feel like to a very wealthy person. Raising taxes on consumers while cutting spending on consumers in order to cut taxes for the already wealthy is wealth redistribution. From the poor, from the working class, from the middle class, to the wealthiest investor class, exacerbating wealth inequality. But hey, maybe that's the plan. Something that's not part of their plan, though, is This Week in Science, coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Blair.
Good science to you, Justin, and everyone out there. How you doing?
They all look like they're doing good there in the chat room.
I was asking you, how are you doing,
Everybody's
Justin?
excited to be- Oh, me? Oh, yeah, I'm great. How are you? You're the one who's been off being sick and diseased for the last couple of weeks. How are you?
No.
Are you back?
I mean, I'm going to say the stereotypical thing that everyone says, like, "Ooh, it's been a doozy of a cold and flu season." Yeah,
Nobody says
accurate.
that, but okay.
Everyone I know with small children around me has
Nobody
said
uses
that.
the word doozy? Nobody says
Well,
doozy.
I say doozy. But yeah,
I'd say
I've had
that.
some sort of illness in my home 4 times this season. And this one was the worst. I had no voice for 5 days. Like no voice. So I'm glad you all had shows without me. That's great.
Well, we missed
Kiki
you, and
is
I'm
not
glad
with
you're
us
back.
today. Where is Kiki right now, Justin?
She's
Do you know?
conferencing. She's
That's what I
doing
thought.
the
Yeah.
science communicatory thing.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us,
Science talk.
myself and Justin. I'm Blair Basdrich. This is Justin Jackson. We are here to talk about science. What did you bring, Justin?
Oh gosh, I have a story about the appropriation of social status by wealthy people, stealing social status from children in ancient Mesopotamia. I've got a brand new form of life on planet Earth. And like, I know that sounds like an overstatement, but wait till you hear the story because it's kind of what it is. And then I don't know where I was having a problem figuring out what the last story was going to be because there's a bunch that are interesting. There is the truth behind NDEs. These are real events, these near-death experiences that people have, and it got studied in a very scientific way. And they have
the documentary called Final Destination, that film documentary. Is that what you're talking
No,
about?
I don't. It might be different than that one. And then the last one is, and this one is just based on a conversation I had, I think in the post show with Kiki, about a moment where I was listening to religious radio, and
Okay.
the preacher on the radio there was saying that global warming couldn't be man-made. And it was on a clear channel that was during, when we were fighting a war for oil in another country, and it just seemed like, gosh, do they really believe that? Or is that something that was like because the station believes it?
And I'm so sorry.
Because
This is
the man-
related to the stories you brought tonight. How?
So the story is somebody went out and actually polled religious leaders, Christian religious leaders around the United States, to find out what their views are on global warming, and I was surprised.
Interesting.
And so will you be. And the last story.
Great. Longest teaser ever. Love it. What did I bring, you ask? I brought...
what did you bring, Claire?
Venomous viruses. I brought averting the male gaze. I brought traffic jams, and I also brought some road rage. So, as we jump into the show, I want to remind you all, with a bubble in my throat, that subscribing to the TWIS podcast is a great way to get our content automatically to your device. You can do that on YouTube or Facebook if you want to see our lovely faces, or you can do that everywhere that podcasts are found, just the audio part. You can search for This Week in Science, or you can, of course, go to twis.org to click on any of the various links found there for your preferred, do we still say podcatcher? Whatever you use. And with that, we're going to move into the science. Vamping. Okay, great. Justin, would you like to start us off with your first story?
Yeah, so this is an archaeology story from Mesopotamia, Anatolia, ancient tombs. These are very old ancient tombs that they were looking at. 18 graves that are 3,100 to 2,800 BC. So a good 5,000 years ago. And so there's this sort of theory of the early rise of power and hierarchy in early Mesopotamia, which is sort of how civilization basically starts. You know, you have these rural communities that are somewhat equal, like everybody's pitching in to do the work. And then as the urbanization grows, as the society grows, they start to get leaders and kings and bureaucrats and laws, and suddenly there becomes a big wealth disparity that grows, and you eventually end up with a ruling class and a sort of lower class caste system taking over. And this is something that is seen here, it's seen in other, kind of all over the world. So this phase that they're looking at 5,000 years ago would have been early Bronze Age, and this is when they would sort of expect to see more of the equal community system. It's before things got very complex and wealth disparity began to take rise. But what they found was, regardless of they had different types. There was stone-built cists and pit graves and lots of different graves that they were digging through, 18 different ones at Basser Hoyuk. They did find that there was a class of people who were decked out in elaborate costumes, had a lot of grave wealth buried with them, that there was a ritual sacrifice of some sort, because there were some subordinate burials where people looked like they had been brutally killed to be placed in the graves. And so it was much earlier than you would expect this. But here's the surprising thing. They don't think that these individuals were wealthy or powerful. They don't think that these individuals belong to any specific elite families. These individuals were adolescents between the ages of 12 and 16. They were just young people. They didn't seem to have any family relationship to each other. They didn't seem to be, there were no other elaborate or wealthy graves or anything like this that they could find that connected them through DNA. It just seemed like if somebody died young, there was a tremendous reverence for them, for the loss. What's interesting then is that this radically changes just in the centuries that come after, where suddenly, as urbanization takes on, there's a transferring of reverence from society's fallen youth to adults who have accumulated wealth and power. And because it comes right on the heels, it kind of looks like not just a reordering of social values, but an appropriation of the status by wealthy, powerful people that replaced the honor that was once only reserved for the children of society, for that sort of extreme loss of losing somebody in the youthful prime of life that the community would honor. Now that status is only after about 100 years after, a few hundred years after these tombs are being unveiled, the later Bronze Age, it suddenly shifts to something that's only bestowed upon the wealthy and the powerful. I thought that was very interesting, especially in light of Zuckerberg going on, a Rogan podcast, doing his best to look like a 14-year-old boy. Like,
you're talking about the black T-shirt and the
fuzzy hair and the little chain thing. Like, he looked like somebody's kid. I'm quite sure he's at least my age.
So,
like
I think he's closer to my age. But let me see. I wanted to. What are these? What are these guys?
I have no idea. I'm not in charge of the pictures.
Okay, but it was in your story.
I know. I have no idea what it is. It's stuff they found in there. Like, they found all kinds of metal weapons. Oh, it says it right there. Yeah. Metal weapons, ornaments, and ornate beadwork. It's too bad they didn't show the beadwork. But these were sort of high-level grave offerings to what would have been essentially just young people. There's no, they couldn't have had a status of power. They couldn't have had a status of wealth. They did not have an elite family lineage that linked to them together. They were just local kids who had died young, and the community, honored that as the most important thing. And I compare that in a world where we have mass school shootings that take place, and people are like, well, thoughts and prayers, moving along. And yet, a car company owner who's the face and brand of his companies, who has also gotten himself involved in politics, sees people using agency against his product that he is the face and brand of, which is like the number 2 reason politicians aren't prominent business people. Number 1 is that appearance of corruption. Number 2 is you have direct agency towards.
What's that first one again? I'm confused. It's never mind. Well,
but he's like so hurt that people are upset. And it's just so unfair.
So back to the story, though. So the youth. Yeah. So the idea is that there's reverence for the youth, specifically youth that die. Does this mean that there was reverence in this community in general towards youth, or only towards the death of youth?
So that's a great question, and there's no way to tell because they only have grapes.
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
But that is a lot of times how we determine these things in the ancient world. When you see entire family lines through generations being buried in elaborate tombs with elaborate wealth, you can say, here is an elite family of wealth and power within this community, and that's why they keep getting buried with lots of loot, and other people are, just dirt pits, right? That they found only these, and not an additional elite or any other sort of segment of the society being so strongly honored. There's a little bit of elitism there still, in a way, in that I think the they discovered that a lot of the attendants, because this is an ancient practice that you would maybe leave the dead with people who could care for them in the afterworld. Jarls in the Viking world would, have all of their mistresses slain and buried with them. And, in Egypt, the attendants would be killed. This also happened to in the Mongolian kings. Would also be buried with like a lot of dead attendants. They thought they were going to get, need help with laundry in the afterworld or something. But those people were foreign. They weren't from the local community. So that also tells you something that, there was a little bit of a hometown kids, maybe not everybody's kids.
Well, Justin, do you think they had any venomous viruses in there with them?
They probably did. Like, who doesn't have? That might have been why they were in there.
Who indeed? Have you heard of this, Justin? Have you heard of viruses being venomous? Have you heard of anything except for an animal being venomous?
Well, not
until today. So there was a study that came out of Loma Linda University School of Medicine. It was a lab that had been doing a bunch of research on venom in rattlesnakes. And as they did that research, they started exploring a broader definition of what venom could be. This has been about 10 years of research. And while teaching special courses on the biology of venom, one professor started kind of asking questions. And so this is lead author William K. Hayes, PhD, professor of biology for the Department of Earth and Biological Sciences at the School of Medicine. And as he kind of expanded his definition of what venom is, he started to see it in more and more places. And so the definition that was kind of developed is that it is a biological toxin introduced into the internal milieu of another organism through a delivery mechanism such as a sting or a bite that inflicts a wound. In the zoo world, the way that we would identify the difference between venom and poison is that venom is injected, poison is ingested. So it's a toxin that's injected in some way into a body, and chaos ensues. And so once you start to look at that, and it's not tied to being an animal, then you start to see it in other places. And so specifically looking at reliance on a venom for solving problems like predation, defense, and competition, and they see that in other organisms such as plants, fungi, bacteria, protists, and even viruses. So plants, right away, I'm like, oh, right. Have you ever put your hand on spiny nettle?
I don't think I have.
Or stinging nettle, I guess is what it's called, stinging nettle. I have. Working in the zoo field, I would be weeding an exhibit, and before I knew what it looked like, I totally barehanded some stinging nettle, and a bunch of little dots popped up all over my hand, and my fingers swelled up.
Oh, no.
It was very painful, and it looked like almost an allergy or poison. It looked so bad, and it did not feel good, and that is venom. That is venom injected into my body via a spine. So once I started looking at this, it's like, oh yeah, duh. Plants totally inject toxins into animals through spines, thorns, and stinging hairs. There's a tree in Australia that I remember I saw Steve Irwin introduce me to on television when I was a teenager that had these giant spines that could totally mess you up if you grabbed onto it in the wrong way. But as they continued to look, they also found bacteria and viruses who evolved mechanisms like secretion systems or contractile injection systems, which to me sounds kind of like the nidae on a cnidarian on like a jellyfish or something like that, which introduces toxins into the targets through host cells and wounds. So they kept finding it in all these different realms. And so this new study has paved the way for all these new discoveries and new research into all these different realms of venom. But I think what's really interesting about that, and the thing that I want to remind everyone of, is a lot of medical treatments come from venom. So if you discover venom in all these different areas, there are all sorts of new avenues for medicine. So that is the thing that I think is really cool about this. So stay tuned on all of the new venoms that are about to be discovered.
John Hogan in the chat room is asking a very interesting question based on the linguistic meanings of venom and poison. Says, Go ahead. Filming a rattlesnake in the garden. It randomly bit a tomato and injected venom. It was said if you ate that tomato, it could poison you.
Yes. So
I guess it would be a poison.
It would, but a lot of venoms break down in stomach acid. So if it could survive through stomach acid, then yes, that would be a poison. So there you go. What do you have for me next, Justin?
This is the new life form found on Earth. I'm pulling this from Popular Mechanics. This bizarre fossil isn't a plant, animal, or fungus. Turns out it's a whole new form of life. So Prototaxides is an extinct organism from the Devonian period. And if you're not familiar with the Devonian period, it's okay. It was like 400 and something million years ago. Like really, 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 really long time. And this Prototaxides has been puzzling scientists since they discovered it. So the early hypothesis linked it to an algae or maybe a primitive type of plant. It's multicellular. So it's not like a bacteria or something like this, or even a colony by the appearance of it. It has sort of advanced, complex, tubular structures. So the early hypothesis thought, okay, this is like a proto-plant, some form of multicellular algae. These were later ruled out by more detailed anatomy. There were no plant tissues, no stomata. Chemical analysis showing cell wall composition was lacking in the cellulose-rich polymers common to algae or land plants. So, process of elimination. This meant that there was one more contender. Prototaxides must be a towering fungus. And when I say towering fungus, I have to look up how tall this was, because it was these were trees before trees. They were.
So according to good old Wikipedia, they were about 3 feet wide and up to 26 feet tall.
So these were the forests across Gondwana. Before, and the problem with like there being these trees, like actually one of the first thoughts was this was these were ancient trees. These are before trees evolved. There were no trees. They can't be a tree. This is huge. This huge thing. But it has to be then a giant fungus. And there was some work done in the past to try to push this into a phylum of fungi. And they kept trying to, pigeonhole this square peg into the round fungal hole, and it just wouldn't fit quite. They had to face a fourth possibility. With all these disparate puzzle pieces, what if it was a member of an entirely extinct eukaryotic lineage? something that we just don't have a modern reference for. A new, to science, form of multicellular life. So they went to a good source of this, which is the Rhine-Chert, which is 407 million year old dirt in Scotland, where a lot of really, really old stuff has been preserved. Because this area must not have been turned over through all the plate tectonics and the erosion and the weathering of the planet over the many, 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 many millions of years. Thin sections and imaging techniques were used. Infrared spectroscopy applied, looking at the anatomical and chemical features. At a microscopic level, Prototaxides contained 3 distinct tube types, occupying varied proportions of its body. Tube morphology and branching patterns deviated from all known fungal structures. There were interconnected networks of these tube types, further differentiating it from any modern fungi. Molecular analysis identified cell wall components that were basically made up of different compounds, but the fossilized products typical of fungal taxa were all absent. Classification models based on machine learning were used to compare spectral features with 102 samples from 6 major taxonomic groups. These models achieved discrimination accuracies of 91% against fungi and 93% against a broader group of organisms, showing that it doesn't align with the fungal lineage. No evidence.
So we need a sixth kingdom, is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, well, it's extinct, so maybe you don't. It's a footnote, but yeah. Well, so here's the thing that I thought was also very fascinating about this. We have discovered this 407 million year old sediment. Discovered it 407 million years ago. 26 feet tall, 3 feet wide. It's a tree-sized thing. There's a huge gap now. Like, whatever we were going to try to figure out, like if it was a fungi or something, or a plant, we could say, oh, based on this or that, it would track backwards in time to our common ancestor somewhere. But this thing's already fully formed the size of a tree, and we have no relative for it. We don't have anything else to compare it to. It had to evolve.
They just came from nowhere, and then they went away.
Just showed up.
Yeah.
But it's really intriguing because, yeah, another huge branch of the tree of life that we didn't know existed, and the first time we encounter it, it's the size of a tree. Meaning there's a whole evolutionary history there of this life form that's completely missing from the record. And then it also hints that there may be others. But certainly this has to have an entire family of other things. It's because it's showing up like with complex structure, not just the size of it, but internally complex, meaning that it had to go through a long evolutionary phase to get just to where we are first encountering this.
Yeah, so either we're missing a bunch of relatives, or the classification is wrong somehow. Those are the two options.
Yeah, I mean,
know.
the classification.
Like, are they sure? Are they sure it's not one of the kinds of life we currently have? Are they definitely sure?
Well, it doesn't look like a duck. It doesn't sound like a duck. And it doesn't have the chemical analysis that a duck would leave.
Right.
No duck residue.
Okay, so I guess this is my point, is how do you know for sure that this is a brand new branch and this isn't an offshoot that went nowhere, that went absolutely crazy evolutionarily, a bunch of outliers, and
that's what it would be. Yeah, it would be both of those things.
Yes. But I guess what I'm saying is a branch of a known type of life that diverged via a lot of mutation, right?
We're probably all diverged from the same. Like, you go back.
But you're
enough.
saying this is a new branch, and I'm saying, is this just a twig that we're only seeing the tip? It's a really weird twig. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the distinction. Is this a fungus that is the end of a dead end line of mutation of fungus that makes it so unusual that we don't recognize that it's a fungus?
But at that point, it's not a fungus. Like, if it's like, basically, you can take all of the myriad of fungi that exist, or all the myriad of plants that exist, and the plants will all use cellulose, and the fungi will all have certain biomarker residues that they leave behind. Mm-hmm. They're going to be maybe different functions, different visual appearances, sort of a thing, but they're not going to be so different that scientists can't determine what it is.
Yeah. I guess that's what I'm having trouble with, is if you're missing the relatives, then you don't have anything to compare it to see transitional states, right? So, like, if you had never seen a snake before, ever, and you saw a snake all of a sudden, you'd be like, what the heck is that? And I'd be like, it's a reptile. And you're like, no, it's not. That's not a reptile. Reptiles have 4 legs. Yeah. Exactly. But now imagine you saw a snake that also had no heart, right? Like, it somehow evolved out of having a heart. So, like, now it has no legs and no heart. You're like, that's obviously not a reptile. But it is.
Let me put it to you differently. You see a snake, but it doesn't have a spine. And you still call it a snake because it looks like a snake. It's wiggly.
So
it's long.
Is a shark a snake? Because it doesn't have bones. Yeah.
It turns out right. And then you add a classification to it and you separate it. They're not the same because of those things.
Right, but like a shark is still a fish. Path. It's I get it. I understand why this is important and neat and groundbreaking. I get all that. I guess what I'm saying is, until we get transitional relatives, there is no way to know that this is a new branch. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that...
See, that part I don't think I would need. I would need, if it's different enough than every other, that you can't put it into a plant, fungi...
So, okay, let me give you another example. Let me give you a real example. So, when I went to college, turtles were a dotted line on the phylogenetic tree. They were like, they could be reptiles, they could be birds, they could be amphibians. Like, they could be archosaurs, they could be crocodile. We don't know. Where do they go? And so it was just kind of like, then there's turtles. They're their own thing, right? And while I was in college, transitional turtles were discovered in the fossil record. And that dotted line became a solid line that connected them to sauropods. So, like, that's my point, is that this is a dotted line right now.
Sauropods?
Yeah.
To sauropods?
Yeah, reptiles.
Okay. But they went back like 60-something million years before...
No, they're related to, like, the same line as lizards and snakes. Yes, it's before, but it's the same fossil record. So basically, they were able to find turtles that had a plastron but no carapace. So they figured out, like, okay, their ribs started to elongate, they fused, they came out of the skin, they had a bottom. Then later, they developed the top to their shell, right? So they were able to find these transitional animals, and they were able to figure out where on the family tree they had a common ancestor with modern reptiles, right? And so that is what I'm trying to say, is that right now we have a big dotted line, or no line at all, just like this tree that's not a tree, that's not a fungus, is just this giant asparagus is just hanging out over here, and we don't know where it belongs. And if we find some relatives, then we can figure out what they're most like, when they were most like other things, and if they are just a weird offshoot of an existing form of life, or if this is a new form of life. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. Only, I think that's what they're showing here, is that because it doesn't have, gosh, I want another analogy. So you open up a turtle.
Yeah.
There's one that was already dead.
Yeah.
And it turns out it doesn't have blood.
Sure.
Okay. Because that's kind of what they're saying here. Like, the internal
Right.
structure of how this thing is built
Right.
is different than plant and different than fungi. Its internal mechanisms are so different, in fact, that they can't even tell what they're like. Now, they said ruled out with 93% sensitivity. It means they have shared maybe 7% similarity with some things. So fair enough. But it's not DNA. We're not going to get DNA from this 407 million year old dirt fossil. It's not going to be answered in that way. But and it's also going to be hard to find. It's going to be hard to find other examples of it if they can't find more there. And so hopefully, searching in the same areas, they can find something else, because it would be kind of weird for it to be a monoculture of this thing.
That's
growing
kind of
all
what I'm
over
getting
Gondwana
at. Yeah.
as a forest.
Is you
But
have to
maybe
find
not.
something that's kind of like it at some point in the fossil record. This thing didn't like just blip in
Unless-
and out of existence.
But it might have, because you got to remember, this is before there was a plant. Well, this is before there
Right,
was a
but where
tree.
did it come from? What adapted to become this giant asparagus? That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
what
Somewhere
was
there's likely a common ancestor for
right?
all
That's
of
what I
these things,
want.
But
Yeah.
as far as early, this would make it, I think, the most complex early life form that we've seen that's multicellular. And it's not what we expected.
But yeah, that's kind of my point too. Is you don't go from like free floating eukaryotic cells with cilia to a giant asparagus. So where did this guy come from?
But you do. But you exactly do. And that's the thing, is that there may have been a forest of those of those asparagus.
I need to share the picture
Right?
I'm talking about because
Okay. There may have been a forest
No, go ahead,
of these as an early experiment on life that collapsed, and we don't know why. It didn't make it, and we don't know why. But something replaced it, and then things came in and filled that niche, and looked like it. Like they thought it was. One of the first impressions, they thought it was, old conifer trees that were a forest that they'd found, but that obviously didn't work out.
sorry, I'm gonna share it right now.
There may have been a lot more experimentation on land life than we think. What,
Yeah, I don't know.
Recreation.
Yeah, from 18.
Yeah, that's some artist drawing from 1888 when they thought
Yeah.
it was a tree.
I think it looks like an
I wouldn't
asparagus.
put too much weight.
Okay.
I wouldn't put too much weight in this being a giant asparagus tree.
Fair enough.
This is also when they thought they had found a tree. So
Sure. All right. Well, anyway, new
And
life.
that one
maybe.
was ruled out a long time ago. It's a new form of life on Earth. A new branch.
Maybe.
Big branch. Towering branch. 26 foot tall, 3 foot wide branch of life on Earth that we knew nothing about.
Okay, I like this picture actually. Here we go. Looks very kind of creepy. They almost look like cactus. There you go. Look at that guy. Wild. Yeah, that looks less like an asparagus.
But they didn't put. I love how they just like didn't put any definition on it because they're like, just no idea. Just no idea.
I don't know, man.
No idea what this is.
I don't know. I don't know what it looks like.
But one thing we can tell from this, at least, is this doesn't seem to be the ancestor of fungi or plants or algae.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense because especially before plants had fully colonized land, there was so much experimentation going on that there were going to be a lot of failed experiments at what became trees, basically, in the niche.
Yeah.
But, Well, Justin, let me ask you this. Do you ever dress to avoid the male gaze?
Constantly.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Constantly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, hummingbirds do
Yeah.
too. Specifically female hummingbirds.
So we also have that in common.
Yeah. So, University of Washington studied some hummingbirds, the white-necked Jacobin hummingbirds, and some, but not all, females within this species will take on the brightly colored plumage that are worn by males. And so this was a team of researchers from the University of Washington and Carnegie Mellon University found the reason. And of course, yes, they are mimicking the males. The trickery, where they look like a male, reduces aggression from males against females when they're trying to mate. And it increases access to nectar resources. So males and females fight with them less if they look like a male for nectar. So they studied all of this based on game theory, which, I don't know. But they used game theory and they incorporated previously collected behavioral data. They combined all of that together and they developed a model of hummingbird behavior so they could understand how birds choose their colors. They found what they call hybrid signals, which means, hold on, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. I could not get to the mute fast enough. They showed that these hybrid signals created an equilibrium that occurs when signalers are in a given situation can be dishonest. So the issue is, here's really what that means. If it was a successful strategy, why don't all the females look like males? Because if it's a good strategy...
Well, because they don't all want to avoid attention.
Of course they do.
All the time.
Because they don't want to get beat up and they want to eat. So it would be beneficial
life's
for
harder
them
as a hummingbird.
to just look like males. But if everybody looked like males, nobody looks like males. If everybody looks like males, it means that there is a higher level of disbelief. Males will just target other males with this behavior because they can't tell who females are. So they have to set up what is an equilibrium in the society where some of them lie and some of them are to be believed. So this is a weird part. That's part of that game theory where there has to be this perfect equilibrium of enough bluffs to get by without too many to elicit a negation of the mimicry, if that makes sense. It's like if everybody looked like they were poisonous, then nobody's poisonous, right? So this isn't I'm going to decide that I have male plumage. No, there's a carrying capacity in this group. So basically there's too many or too little that look like men. And so they've just figured out, like, biology is the world, nature has figured it out, not in the individual hummingbirds. Just when there were too many, it wasn't beneficial. When there were too few, it wasn't beneficial. And so over evolutionary time, there's been this perfect equilibrium of the number of tricky females that it works for this little hummingbird culture. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say about that.
That brings us to the break. I'll be right back.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. If you've just tuned in, you are listening to This Week in Science with Justin Jackson and Blair Bazderich. That's me. Hey, do you want to help us grow? Get a friend to subscribe today. And Justin, please mute your microphone because we could hear a bunch of rustling. Get your friends to subscribe to TWIS today. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the various pod-catching apps. Just look for us and subscribe. Get your friends to subscribe as well. Also, of course, thank you for listening, and you are the reason that we do this. Please check out Patreon if you're interested in supporting us. All of us do this for free, but every little bit helps get us various hosting, pay for the website, get us some new tools for the show, get us new equipment, software, all that kind of good stuff. So if you can support us through Patreon, you can go to TWIS.org. You can click on the Patreon link and you can choose your level of support. There are kickbacks for that, like we can say your name in the show. Sometimes you'll get a little prize. So check that out. Go to TWIS.org, click on the Patreon link, and be a part of bringing science and sanity to people. Something that's really important right now. And I am going to, I guess, vamp. Because I don't want to do the animal corner to nobody. So I'm going to answer some questions. Rachel, I'm very sorry. You're going to have to edit this out. Happy Hog wants to know, how does the immune system react to venom? Say I've been bitten by copperhead snakes on 3 occasions. So if you did not have a reaction, that's probably, I don't know this for sure, I'm not giving you medical advice, but they probably gave you a dry bite. So a lot of times venomous snakes will give a dry bite to a human because humans are too big to eat. The reason they have venom is to subdue prey before they eat them. So a lot of times they'll hold back venom because they don't want to waste it. Venom is really energetically expensive, and so they don't want to waste that to deliver it to something that's too big to eat. And so that's why you will get dry bites from snakes often if you're a big, scary human. The funny thing about that is that young snakes are actually really bad at delivering a dry bite. They have trouble controlling how much venom. And so even tiny young snakes will often have the worst payload of venom. People get really sick and can even die from a bite from a younger snake because the younger snake is not as good at kind of like metering how much venom they deliver. And so that's important information to tell if you're on the phone with medical professionals and you say you got bit by a rattlesnake or some other venomous snake, to say if you think it was a big snake or a small snake or if it was a young snake, because that does happen sometimes, that the younger snakes don't know how to deliver dry bites and they don't know how to deliver the right amount of venom, and so they'll over provide, and that'll be more dangerous. Hey, Justin, can you respond to some people in the chat for a second while I take a quick break? I'm so sorry.
Go for it. Oh, gosh. Hi, chat room. Whoa, what are your questions? What was the atmosphere back when the giant tree thing was there? What was I have no idea. What was I'm going to just type it into the atmosphere. Like, how many? 400 million years ago. According to my Google AI, it was a warm climate with shifting glacial and interglacial periods, and life had a major impact on the effect of the atmosphere, with oxygen levels rising significantly. So it looked like it was nice. Oxygen was a lot lower. So that's a great point. This Prototaxides might not have liked the rise in oxygen. Maybe that's why it's not around anymore. Good question, John Hogan. Very good question. while Blair is gone, I'm going to go ahead and do Justin's Animal Corner. This is an interesting story. This is horses, donkeys, and zebras. This is one that got left off the list today. Horses, donkeys, and zebra, equine, if you will, have a genetic adaptation that breaks normal transcribing rules. So, and what's interesting is they linked this weird adaptation to why it is that equine are such good athletes. They have intense oxygen use ability, and their oxygen uptake per unit of body mass is more than twice that of an elite human athlete. There's been all sorts of studies that have tried to figure out why it is that they're such good athletes. Usually they're doing things like looking at the muscle structure and locomotion. These things have been studied. But the genetic basis of this metabolic output has been unclear. And what they found is the current researchers focused on a gene and pathway, KEAP1 and the KEAP1 NRF2 pathway, which regulates antioxidant responses and mitochondrial energy production. They were like, they know that this pathway is involved in managing oxidative stress in birds, which allows them to fly. In some of the early vertebrates, it helped them to adapt to the environmental stresses of getting onto Earth for oxygen used for the same time. So they zeroed in on this one gene, KEAP1. Maybe this is the source of the equine energy conservation. And they looked at the gene, and there's a stop codon, like at 0.15 of a gene that's like 600 nucleotides long. And a stop codon usually means it tells it to stop. Hey, stop turning this into a protein. But if you stop at 14, it's basically like looking at the first instruction of like IKEA furniture, right? And then just being like, oh, I got it from here. Don't need the rest of it. The protein shouldn't work. It shouldn't do anything. And yet, when they tested the cells, they found that, hey, look, it's the protein's present in its fully transcribed form. It's there. It's doing what it's supposed to do, even though it's got this weird stop codon that's supposed to tell it to stop printing, basically. Stop right here. Make no more. Okay. So what's going on? This doesn't make sense. So they used a CRISPR-Cas9 model to look at the genetic changes in human cells, mass spectrometry, and examine protein structure, all these sort of things. And they studied the horse muscle and skin cells alongside samples from other species to assess differences in the energy output and oxidative stress responses to narrow this down. And analysis eventually revealed that there's a weird thing that equine do that nothing else does. The stop codon can be reinterpreted. Now, this sometimes happens. The stop codon can sometimes the cell can insert an amino acid rather than halting translation, and it normally has a very specific system to guide it then through the ribosome that overrides the stop codon. Selenocysteine insert. In horses, there's no such signal found in the KEAP1 transcript. Yet the transcript still continued. So even when they this sometimes happens in biology, it must be happening here. Nope, that's not what it was. In fact, it was two things that they found that were different in equus in general. The first is that it's actually putting in a different chemical that is allowing it to continue the read through. But it's also the machinery of the ribosome is different. So there were two genetic changes that took place to overcome this stop codon being in a completely terrible location. And the fact that they say that these weird combination of mutations are in all modern equine species means it must have emerged very early in the lineage. And they think that this change that allowed for increased aerobic performance may then have shaped the evolution of speed and endurance traits in the horse. So this weird mutation and the way that the equine biology overcame it may have, very early on, may have actually created the framework for being horses. Kind of an interesting study. I like this study too because they went in to go look at something specific, and then we're like,
and it wasn't there.
It's just not there.
Yeah. I like how that graphic I was sharing shows that pigs are less athletic than humans, because I understand why that would be an expectation, but I don't actually think the average human could outrun a pig who's running full tilt. But, whatever.
But, it's weird because pigs, I've seen like the pig races, and they seem like they do okay. The thing is, the pigs have a hard time because they're missing a ligament in the back of the skull that allows them to have fixed vision while they run. Right. So as they're running, their head's just a little bit like, oh, where is everything?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really
I guess
awkward.
I'm thinking more about like wild boars or stuff like that. If you look at like a farm pig, you're right. I could probably outrun a farm pig. Anyway, shall we enter Blair's Animal Corner?
John Hogan, real quick. I think horses started in the Americas. That's partially correct. I mean, horses were in the Americas, but they were also in Asia. And they used to travel, early horses used to travel back and forth between North America and Asia across the Bering Strait, because that Bering Strait region would basically be an open plain for large periods of time. That's also how I think the dire wolf and some of the saber-toothed cats moved back and forth. There was a link between North America and Asia, so it's still kind of like iffy saying it started one place or the other, because I don't know where the earliest that we found, but we know that they were going back and forth for a lot of their history.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of these types of animals that have been around for a really long time. Like we have ratites, the large flightless birds, on almost every continent, because they were moving all over the place.
But they also flew there, right? And then we're like, this is nice. Why leave?
No, they can't.
Are you
fly.
sure? I feel like the flightless birds that got to like New Zealand or Madagascar must have just gotten there and been like, "Yeah, I'm good." This has got everything.
Okay. Excellent.
No predators.
Excellent point. There's no ratites there in either of those places you just named.
Okay.
Any hoozle. Are you ready for Blair's Animal Corner?
With Blair.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
I totally forgot, actually.
Bats? Birds?
Bats. Let's talk about some bats. Bats. When you see them emerging from a cave, they look very ominous. They come out. It's almost like a liquid, the way they spill out of the cave, and then they expand onto the horizon. Let me ask you this. How do they not all run into each other?
Don't they?
No,
they just recover
don't.
quickly. Oh.
Bat researchers spend a lot of time.
Sorry. Oops.
trying to see these collisions, and they do not happen often. Hundreds of thousands of bats fly out of the small opening at once, and they really don't run into each other.
Wow.
So researchers at Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior wanted to look at this further.
What if there's like a gust of wind? Right.
Great question. Yes. So how do they know where they're going? So most bats navigate via echolocation. So they're not really looking. They're shrieking and they're waiting for the sound to bounce and come back to them, which makes it even more
complicated. There's 100,000 of them shrieking and echolocating.
Yes.
Can they tell their
exactly.
own echolocate?
Great question. And that's exactly what this study was about. It was about something called jamming, which is the loss of acoustic information due to other information happening at the same time. So if a bunch of bats are echolocating at once, when a whole colony whoa. Everything went black for a second.
Yeah, everything paused for a moment. That's fine.
Great. So when they all emerge, they're all echolocating at once, and then their calls, the individual calls, should be drowned out by the others. This is what would be called jamming. And so in a laboratory, scientists observed individual bats in small groups that echolocated at the same time, and they found that each individual bat echolocated at slightly different frequencies, which in theory should help with jamming. But if you're looking at hundreds of thousands of bats, that's not going to help. So researchers in conjunction with Tel Aviv University studied greater mouse-tailed bats in Israel's Hula Valley. Over 2 years, they tagged tens of bats with lightweight trackers that recorded the bats' locations every second. So they tagged them and then they'd watch these large emergences. And so they also included ultrasonic microphones so they could record the auditory information that was happening from the individual bat's point of view. And so what they found was that there were about 94% of echolocations being jammed. So indeed, it was very difficult for them to be able to get any echolocations to work effectively. But within 5 seconds of leaving the cave, yeah, go ahead.
So are they even trying?
Okay, so within 5 seconds of leaving the cave, the bats reduced their jamming. So something happened in that first 5 seconds. So what happened? One, they fanned out. So they dispersed. So that first 5 seconds, maybe they weren't trying that hard. They were just like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. Just kind of bracing. And then in 5 seconds, they'd fanned out enough that there was less jamming. But they also emitted shorter and weaker calls at a higher frequency. Now, the weird thing about that is, remember I said in the lab, they were doing a variety of frequencies so that they wouldn't sound the same. So in this one, it seemed like they were all going to higher frequencies for shorter, weaker calls. Do you have an idea of why that would be?
Okay, can I? Yeah.
Yes.
My guess is going to be that they were doing a pacing. Like they were like 1 and 2 and 1 and a 2 and to flap, because if you're not going faster or slower than anybody around you, if you're all flapping at the same rate, you shouldn't be running into each other.
Uh-huh. That's an interesting idea. What they think is going on is that they're really just doing these short, quick calls so that they know what's directly in front of them and nothing else. They don't care about what is behind them, what is on either side of them. Wow, my computer is trying to bail on me.
Yeah, I can tell. You keep micro-freezing.
So my whole screen just went white right there. So it went black before, and then my whole screen went white. Really interesting. Okay, so they're doing these tiny little calls so that they can just, quote unquote, see the bat directly in front of them and no other information. All the information, not important. Just give me the little beep so I can see directly what's in front of me. And then I'll do it again, beep, again right away, just so I can go, where'd you go, where'd you go, where'd you go, where'd you go? And you know what actually this made me think of is schooling fish. Because schooling fish don't pay attention to all of the fish. They have to pay attention to like one fish, which is why if you watch schooling fish, it's like you're doing the wave in a stadium, right? It's a delayed reaction as it moves back through the school because they're all just following the fish in front of them. And so
it's like you can see it in traffic too, in cars. There used to be a place that I worked that I could watch the freeway, could see the freeway from work. And it was this one point that if you could see where a slowdown would happen. And it happened quite often in this one area because the road curves, so cars kind of like can't see that far ahead, so they slow down. But then all of the other cars would be like, it would be sort of like a wave effect, would sort of slow down, and that wave would move back, and then it would start again, and it would sort of be cars getting denser together, and that would sort of move back, and as cars escaped a wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So just like cars in traffic and schooling fish, they're really just following the bat in front of them. And so I think, when you hear that, it's kind of a like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But we didn't know that before. So the jamming doesn't matter, even though it's happening. They're really just trying to get out there so they can fan out by following the guy or gal, the bat directly in front of them. So that's how they
So I still want to test my being in sync theory. But it would have to be a recording from in the cave before they leave, where they'd be like okay, and like they'd have to like start before they take off, so that everybody knew what the count was, so they could start practicing and then get it down, so that when they took off, they were already on the beat. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know about that. You should go ahead and do that research, Justin. I think it'd be very interesting.
There is an underpass at least over not far from here that I could go test it out.
And then my last story for tonight is all about birds on the Galapagos exhibiting road rage. Are there enough?
They're out in the middle of
cars on the Galapagos for there to even be road rage? Yeah. Yes, actually.
What are they raging about?
This is a new study discovering that birds in the Galapagos Islands are changing their behavior due to traffic noise. The Galapagos, of course, has had a rise in tourism, especially since, a more recent resurgence in like science being cool and wanting to see Charles Darwin's stomping grounds and all that good stuff. But also, the permanent population is increasing by about 6% per year. And all of that is causing more and more vehicles to come to island roads. The cool thing about that, and the reason the Galapagos continues to be a really cool study space, is that despite being a very small archipelago, there's a variety of environments, which is why it was so cool to Charles Darwin, right? Is that all these variety of environments created a variety of evolutionary pressures, which created a variety of, for example, the beaks on the birds, right? And so in this case, that also is true for traffic. There are areas of the Galapagos with traffic, and there are areas of the Galapagos with no road noise and no traffic. And so there's the opportunity to study birds and their bird song in different situations. And so this study is from Anglia Ruskin University and the Konrad Lorenz Research Center at the University of Vienna, and they researched the impact of vehicle noise pollution on Galapagos yellow warblers, which is a songbird that's found all over the Galapagos Islands. And so researchers played bird songs from a speaker, which simulated an intruder. It was accompanied by traffic noise that they had recorded at 38 locations across the Galapagos, all locations where the warblers live. 20 sites were within 50 meters of the nearest road, and 18 were over 100 miles away. And so, either lots of traffic noise or little to none. Then they measured the songs. Most of the time, the songs were to ward off intruders because that's why they played the other songbird. They wanted to see them ward off intruders. And then they looked at the physical aggressive behaviors, like approaching the speaker closely and making repeated flights across to the speaker. Be like, hey, who's in there? Get out of there. And when they had traffic noise, the researchers found that the warblers showed increased aggression, but those living away from the roads showed decreased aggression when they had no noise. And so they have determined that the effect of living on a roadside territory had an impact on their behavior. And even on Floriana Island, which only has 10 vehicles total, there was a difference on if they were near the road noise or not. And so there's even a minimal experience of traffic on, or impact of traffic on their songs and behavior, even with only 10 vehicles present. They had a longer duration of their song. They had more aggression, and that shows that there's long-term selection based on noise experience. So just like with the beaks and the different food sources, there's differences in songs and behavior based on traffic noise. And so it's important for us to know that there is an impact on selection based on human elements like traffic noise. And so adaptation is happening as a result of human impact, of course. And so this shows the importance of considering behavioral plasticity and conservation efforts. So like, what other factors are going on around there? Can animals adapt to human impacts? Can they not? And then also, of course, mitigating the effects of noise pollution on wildlife. A good reminder that noise pollution is a problem, even on these tiny islands with only 10 cars.
So, I didn't know you could go and visit. I didn't know you could go tour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny because it occurs to me, it's like, oh, but I wouldn't want to add to all that tourism and sort of ecologically sacred space. And so then, like, this always happens to me. Everywhere where I would want to go, I don't want to go for another reason.
Yeah.
I'm bad at traveling.
Why don't you do? You could always do a kind of you can do vacations where you aid research. Like Earthwatch is famous for that. You can go on a vacation where part of it is doing field research.
Well, that would be cool.
Yeah, and then you're not contributing to just the general kind of.
But is it real research,
ecological
or is it like
disaster
the kind
of tourism?
or is it the kind of work that
research?
they had the astronauts doing once they were stranded on?
No, these are real research projects.
So obviously we plan everything in advance, and so this isn't something we planned. But could you go reorganize the Tang bottles?
No, man. When I went to Churchill and I saw polar bears, we stayed at one of the research stations, and they do. I don't know. It's not ecotourism. It's beyond that. It's like it's a research trip, right? So you go on this research trip, and you do ice cores in the lower Arctic Circle.
Kind of cool.
That's real research. Yeah,
but you're also like a zoologist. You're also like a proper scientist.
No, anybody can do it. Anyone can do it. You could go and sign up to go on one of these trips right now.
Okay.
And I think they have trips in the Galapagos.
That one I wouldn't mind doing in the middle of summer in the Central Valley. It would be a good time to go somewhere cold. I'd really appreciate it then.
It was great. It was the experience of a lifetime. Anyway, nice. Totally unrelated to what we're talking about here, but the bottom line is that noise pollution is a problem everywhere there is noise. And it's at this point, humans have just added to the soundscape of a space, and we are learning all of the different ways that animals respond to it. And some of them are favorable, some of them are not favorable, some of them are neutral, like these warblers having longer songs. Okay. Unless that increases the likelihood of them being predated upon, because it gives away their location, or if it takes too much energy and it's an impact on them for that reason, right? Otherwise, okay, you can sing a little bit longer. Aggression, that's a whole nother thing, right? So increased aggression could be an ecological problem. But, yeah, there you go. Warbler road rage. What else do you have, Justin?
I think we need a TWIS road trip to the Galapagos. What have I got? Okay, so near-death experiences. So, some of the ones that you've heard of, I'm assuming. Out-of-body experiences. There's like a dissociative sense of leaving the physical body. Some people claim they can look down and see the operating room.
Yeah.
Distorted awarenesses of time, where it seems like time is stopped or slowed down or is accelerated. Overwhelming emotional sense of calm, peace, and well-being. There's the flood of memories, the life flashing before your eyes effect.
Interesting.
And then there's also things like bright lights or lights at the ends of long tunnels, visitations by deceased relatives, unknown figures perceived as sentient, maybe even alien. Mystical, spiritual imagery abounds. And we've heard all of these reports. And what I think has fascinated the public about near-death experiences is how often we've heard the same types of stories. You know, how many times people have seen angels in a near-death experience, or aliens, or that tunnel, or those bright lights, or had that floating out of the body experience. You know, it hints that maybe there's something to this. That is, of course, a selection bias, because there's far more common forms of near-death experiences that are terrifying, that are nightmarish. There are ones that are just entirely mundane. It's like, oh, yeah, it was really weird. I had this sensation that I was a turtle doing a podcast. That was the whole, like, for like 20 minutes, I was rambling on about bats.
But you almost died?
That's what was really going on, but what I experienced was being a turtle having a podcast. Like, I don't, or they can just be complete nonsense, right? You know, they can be very vivid, very realistic, but still not have a cohesion to them. So, anyway, these researchers decided that they were going to look at this from a very scientific sort of point of view, and they did all sorts of data collection on NDE experiences. So there was no single experimental cohort that was analyzed by these authors. They did synthesized data from all sorts of previously published studies, including animal studies, neuroimaging data from critically ill patients. They found a consistent pattern of a physiological disruption that emerged during cardiac arrest and other critical events, which was reduced cerebral blood flow, triggering hypoxia, and then as well as elevating levels of carbon dioxide. Then there's a cascade of factors that induce cerebral acidosis, depletes ATP, and the cell's primary energy source, and then produces a surge in neurotransmitter release across multiple brain systems: serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, noradrenaline, GABA. Endorphins are they're all like, release, go now. Basically, people are asphyxiating, and it's triggering the brain to be like, let's make this painless.
Yeah,
they think there's an
so they're
evolutionary
hallucinating,
aspect
basically. Yeah, because their brain can't breathe.
Researchers found parallels between near-death experiences and psychedelic-induced states with substances like DMT, ketamine, which is like a classic dissociative drug, which affect similar receptor systems. They also found that psychological states such as Disassociation proneness, REM sleep intrusion tendencies might predispose certain individuals to having NDEs when they're under stress. They also found that you could even from fainting, like, have an NDE. Because again, it's just that loss of oxygen and blood flow to the brain. So, anyway.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah. And a lot of the imagery that people used seemed to run with the individual's broader views or beliefs.
Yeah.
If they were religious or mystical in any way. Like, the most common NDE is probably, I'm assuming, seeing the, Hindu god, or, like, maybe getting visited by the Buddha, right? Just because that's going to be more people predisposed to that. It would be, I think, very odd to have an intimate interaction with the Buddha if you're a hardcore, Muslim or Christian or something, or maybe atheist even. Like, the things that people saw kind of fit, like, their broader worldview. Mm-hmm. So,
well, they also fit a trope, at least in Western society, of what you're supposed to see during a near-death experience. So, like, did you see what you expected to see because of what the media told you you're supposed to see?
Maybe, but those are also the reports that are then going to get retold because they fit that mold. Because if they don't fit that mold...
Absolutely.
If what was it? Well, Justin, you almost died. What was it like? Oh, I saw a train going by, but all the cars were swans. Like... Oh, well,
that's
maybe
so funny.
Not make the 5 o'clock
I saw
news.
Garfield eating lasagnas.
Like, maybe that one they don't put on the news is like, or you don't get invited to the documentary on NDEs. Yeah. Oh yeah, Yo Gabba Gabba. Totally. You totally see Yo Gabba Gabba.
So I guess my last question about this, Justin, is. What can we learn from this study and bring forward? Just that near-death experiences, while unique to the person, are based on a hypoxic reaction of the brain, and so it's just classic psychedelic response, basically. Like, you're hallucinating. Yay!
Yeah. So there's some element of it that... So we know now that there's this response that takes place of releasing all of these things. Why? Now, this isn't part of this research here. This is the future research. We'll be looking into this. But if there's an evolutionary mechanism for it, is that mechanism meant to be like, let's just not feel pain on the way out? Mm-hmm. Or is it preservative? Like, if somebody is in a brain dead state, would injecting all of these things into or raising all these levels in the brain have a preservative effect, a restorative effect? I really don't know. We know the brain is doing this on its own. But for sure, it's not
just the brain not getting oxygen and hallucinating, just as a byproduct of that, and it has nothing to do with any of these other reasons.
Wait, say again?
It could be preservative, it could be a reduction in pain, or could it just be the fact that the brain's not getting oxygen and a side effect of that is hallucinating?
And this is mechanistically what happens?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It could be. It could just be like, but there's not a whole lot of accidents in biology. Especially in the brain that is such a command and control center, and not one that like we utilize necessarily. I don't mean executive function even. I'm talking about without executive function. The brain is controlling biological everything that is happening in life. So if it's doing this, maybe there is, it's a question mark, maybe there is a preservative effect in the face of loss of blood flow for this heightened activity to be taking place. Not for a long time, maybe. Or maybe. Anyway, they're probably
My money's on the brain malfunctioning, and that's it.
It sounds like. My last story, which I teased very long in the intro of the show, came from that experience I was sharing with Kiki last week of, like, wondering about the connection between religion and politics as I listened to somebody say, global warming isn't man-made, God controls the weather, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. Turns out, according to this study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by somebody, I don't know who, nearly 90% of U.S. Christian religious leaders believe humans are driving climate change. However, they don't share that information. The majority don't share that information with their congregation. They don't talk about it. That is an overwhelming majority. And now this is only Christian, only in the United States. But they're like, they hit like all the, they apparently did it in a based on popularity or number of followers. They did the Baptists, the Methodists, the Black Protestants, maybe the white Protestants too, I don't know. Roman Catholic denominations, it says and more, so I'm guessing maybe they talked to Mormons and the Lutherans and the whatever else, whatever the variety out there is. And what they got back was 90% actually believe that global warming is man-made. But most of their followers don't think that it's a belief in their religion. They also did some testing where they shared that data with people, and that actually, 9 out of 10 believe that global warming is a thing. And they said that maybe I would do more about this. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So what's going on here?
Wait, hold on. Is this intentional or not? That they're not talking about it?
So partly I think it's a little, for them it might be a little bit like us talking politics on this show. And they don't really feel comfortable about it, and they don't want this space to be about it. And it also might invite, like, I'm an expert on religion stuff. I don't want to start talking too heavily about sciencey stuff or the scientific basis for discovery of information, because then I got to do a lot of splaining. Not other things. I don't know if it's that.
See, I have trouble with that because I feel like a lot of and forgive me because I was not raised in a Christian household, so I don't know for sure. But my understanding is that a lot of the fundamentals of the Christian faith have to do with stewardship, have to do with leaving the planet nicer than you found it, have to do with caring for living things. And so environmentalism should go hand in hand with that religion. And I know some congregations do that. They spend time in nature, they pick up litter, they plant plants, they care for the earth in a lot of ways. This feels like a natural connection to that, of just like, let's make the planet nicer for everybody. And if the planet's in trouble, whether it's man-made or not, which it is, but if it's a problem, you should fix it for future generations. It's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
So maybe
know.
it's a framing issue, is because I think this is a huge problem that climate change has had until now. I've talked about this a bunch, of course, but like this data forward approach has not been successful. And I think that is part of the problem, is that scientists like to be analytical. They don't like to bring feelings into things, but religion is based on feelings ultimately. No matter what you believe, it's based on belief and a feeling and a connection, right? And so like to exclude feelings from the conversation seems to be a disservice, and might be why there's this weird separation of this particular field of environmentalism from religion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know why they're like, and then people who get informed based on this, that the leaders in their religion, do believe in global warming, feel more like open to talk about it. Like part of why people don't talk about it with their fellow congregates or whatever might be because it doesn't make, hey, this is a science thing. Is this subversive to religion? I don't want to look like I'm falling off the church train here. But yeah, but it is interesting, and it's obviously, it looks like an untapped resource for reaching out to communities to pay attention and get involved in protecting the planet. That number seems like also, though, I get that 9 out of 10 would believe it, because you probably got to be a pretty smart person, do a lot of reading to be a pastor or a preacher or a priest or what have you. But if their congregation, if they know their congregation is politically opposed to it, like, it's a political job on one level. Mm-hmm. Like, if you've got the 7 a.m. and it's full, and you start talking about global warming, and then next Sunday comes around, and everybody's at the 8 o'clock, right? You just failed to fill the pew on your shift. Yeah, they might have moved over to somebody else's shift, but still, I don't know if that's how. I don't know if they're like, yes, I just got a full house. I don't know how they react to those things. But I would assume it's nice to see the seats filled.
It feels like you and I are not well equipped to have this conversation. But I will also say that in my experience in the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation and doing climate change interpretation training and connecting to the communities, there are a lot of religious groups that are interested in having this conversation, that are interested in doing things. And so I think that's also important, is to elevate those conversations, because we hear about the extremist groups that are very against it, that want to deny the science behind what's going on and don't want to look towards the future. And we don't often highlight the good stories. Right. So we don't hear the stories of the community groups where churches are places for communities to connect and make positive change in their space, because those groups do exist. And so I apologize for the typing sounds, but I wanted to pull up the exact numbers because I wanted to be precise. So as of 2021, Yale study, from the Yale program on climate change communication, 76% of people in the United States think climate change is happening now. 61% discuss it rarely or never. 24% hear someone they know talk about climate change at least once a month. So I'm going to say that again. 76 people in the U.S. think climate change is happening now. 61% discuss climate change rarely or never. So that's pretty close to all of them.
Yeah. And
only 24% of people hear people they know talk about climate change at least once a month. So in Noki, we call it the spiral of silence. So basically what that means is people believe that climate change is happening. They believe it's happening, but they think no one else does. And so that's exactly, I think, what you're getting at, Justin, is that there might be congregation leaders who would like to talk about it, but they assume that nobody wants to hear about it. But here, everyone else sitting there is thinking the same thing. They believe it. Nobody else around them does. And so while none of us talk about it, we all feel alone. Nobody is prone to act. They feel like individual actions aren't enough, which is true. You need larger solutions. And so you end up isolated and you feel like you can't do anything. And so that's why talking about climate change is so important. That's why we need to figure out, whoever needs to figure out how to get these people up on the pews to talk about climate change, because it's everybody's future, right? And I'm sorry, I'm on the front. I'm at the front of the congregation spewing this out to all of you. I apologize. You hit a chord, but ultimately talk about climate change, even if it's just to be like, oh man, Did you hear about XYZ? Preferably, it should be about something good that's happening that you hear about. Share good news. Don't forget to share good news. We always share bad news. We never share good news. So that's really important because hope fosters action. Fear fosters inaction, right? So like that's a really important of the conversation
I'll counter one thing you said about individual action not being enough. Everything that humans do is an individual action. Like,
Incorrect.
It's all... Everything that we do is individual action.
In the definition
if we
that
go
I
as
am
a group,
using,
that individual action is additive. It can be even force multiplier, which is why we all pitch in a little bit for taxes.
As an example,
then,
an individual action would be, I'm going to buy a hybrid. Okay? A collective action would be, the state of California provides incentives for people to buy hybrids. That is the difference, okay? A collective action is voting. A collective action is going out together and doing a large community cleanup event. A collective action is something that has a larger impact. If you're doing things alone, not only is it not a big deal, but it feels like not a big deal. And then it doesn't encourage you to act again. That's the other thing. Community action encourages you to do it again and again and again. There's accountability. And so then you also have the time piece that is more impactful than you doing it by yourself. I'm sorry, I could talk about this a long time. I have talked about this a long time. But there really is a difference. You can even take something that is considered a single action and you can turn it into a community action. That is possible. So consider that. That's all I'm saying. And I will stop there. Yeah, have we done it? Are we all done?
I think we have come to the end of yet another wonderful This Week in Science episode. What episode was this again? 1009.
9, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yes. So with that, I hope everyone has enjoyed the show. Thank you all for listening and watching. Shout outs to Fada for his help with social media and show notes, Gord for manning the chat room, Identity4 for recording the show, Rachel, sorry it's a lot this time. I apologize. Thank you for your assistance in editing the show. And I'd also like to thank our Patreon sponsors for their generous support. And I would like to thank them by saying thank you, because I don't have the list. You'll have to wait till next week to hear Kiki say it.
We do know it ends with an applause for Tony Steele.
Excellent. Thank you to all of you. You know who you are. We'll know who you are next week for your support on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting us, please go to patreon.com/thisweekinscience or twis.org and click on the Patreon link. On next week's show, we should all be back together again. What?
That's going to be... Well, I might not be here. I'll let you know later this week.
Oh, okay. Some of us will be here next week. Such a rotating door lately. I'm part of it too. It's just, that's life. It's life right now. Life is very interesting for all of us currently. It was a lot easier when we were all locked inside, huh? We had nowhere to be.
That was fun. I actually honestly preferred. I thought that was a fabulous time. But some of us, at least, will be back Wednesday, 8 p.m. Pacific time, broadcasting live from our Twitch and our YouTube and our Facebook channels.
Hey, do you want to listen to us as a podcast? Perhaps while you plan your next community gathering around climate action? Just search for This Week in Science where podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe as well.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, www.twis.org, where you can sign up for a newsletter that we promise never to send you.
We did a few at some point. Yeah. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address or suggestion for an interview, please let us know on one of our social media accounts or send us an email. You can find us. Go to twis.org. You can find all of our various connections. And be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, in the subject line, or your email will be spam filtered to the nearest archipelago where Justin and Kiki and I will not be.
We look forward to discussing science with you again next week. And remember, if you've learned anything from the show, it's all in your head.
Yeah.
This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. This week in science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer and it shouldn't be news. That what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculation.
And that's it. I'm not as good at the fade as Kiki is. But here we are. We've done it. What's going on in the chat room until Justin gets back? That was funny. I haven't talked about climate change on the show in a while. And I actually, I also hadn't taught a Noki training in a while. And then I've taught 3 in the last few months. And so I re-familiarized myself with all of the content. And so that was pretty fun to kind of be reminded of that conversation and having it on the show, because I feel like we haven't done that in a long time. But I suggest everybody checks out NOCI, NNOCCI, National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. If you work in a situation where you find yourself talking about climate change, or if you volunteer in a situation where you talk about climate change, or you're a member of a community where you want to talk about climate change, there's free trainings, there's paid trainings, there's longer term trainings, there's short term trainings, there's free online content, there's asynchronous stuff, there's in-person stuff depending where you live. So there's lots of opportunities to learn how to be a practice science communicator, just kind of as a shameless plug. You can check that out at noki.org. It's really cool. Unfortunately, they had a bunch of federal funding that they lost. So they're going to have some more paid trainings than they usually have to try to recoup some of those losses because they had a bunch of federal grants that they no longer have. So that's a big bummer. But, you know, Noki's been around for a long time. It will continue to be around. And I'm sure there will be future opportunities for more funding and more large projects. So that'll be interesting to see. Does anyone want me to talk about anything in particular? Otherwise, I'm just kind of going to muse at all of you until Justin gets back. Zombie Tom Hanks. Have I heard hundreds of thousands of bats scream before? No, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't feel like I've seen or heard a lot of bats. I've seen bats at like campsites and stuff before. But Justin, you're muted.
I hear them all the time in Davis.
Yeah. I think I hear them sometimes out where I'm at, but
At first, you
know.
can
It's
assume
hard
it's
to
like a
tell
chirpy
sometimes.
bird, like a really chirpy bird. But then you're like,
yeah.
it's the middle of the night. Like, there's not a lot
Well,
of
and
birds
my night
chirping around,
vision is
flying around.
trash because I'm colorblind. So like,
So they're still hard to see, and I'm not colorblind, and I've got used to have perfect vision. They're still hard to see unless they're
Yeah.
like right up on like a light that's attracted a bunch of insects or something, like a street light. You might see them zipping through. There was one place I had years ago that had all these big dome lamps sort of on the walkways between apartments. And they were like figure eight circling those things.
yeah, there were
picking up
probably
bugs.
lights that were attracting bugs or something, and so they were like, "Oh
Yep.
man, buffets
And so
open."
they came in nice and low and were like in this corridor, and you'd see them just sort of zipping around. It was kind of cool.
Neat. All right. Any last things you want to talk about, Justin? I kind of want to go to bed.
Okay. Yeah. Real quick. There was something I was watching on a news report that I just thought was an interesting takeaway. One of the people who has been fired, who worked in the federal government, in the health department, this would have been fired under Doge, but specifically under Kennedy, is the one who authorized the use of an experimental antiviral monoclonal antibody that was used to save an old man who had gotten a severe case of COVID, who happened to have been the president at the time.
That's hilarious.
Literally,
Oh my gosh.
the man who saved the life, who made the call to push through this technology, this therapeutic, that saved the life of the current and past president, got fired because he was an unnecessary part of the federal government. This also tells you this also is telegraphing, sadly, how much we're going to really pay for this.
It's going to take decades to recover.
Oh, so I'm oddly, I am a lot less pessimistic about that. I think it will be one executive branch change away from rebuilding everything, and I don't think you start from
No,
scratch.
I think that's fine. I think that's fine. I just think
we're in an age where the research data that we're working with isn't going to go away. We're going to lose. You're right. We're going to be losing a lot of active research that's taking place.
that's
gonna
more
be
what I
halted.
mean, is that it's going
That's
to
what
take
you mean,
decades to restart research, gather supplies, gather procedures, gather data, synthesize data, review data, run repeat research. Like, we're basically losing a lot of momentum that it takes a long time to get back. And that, I think, is the thing that's really scary, is you can rehire people, you can reopen offices, but you can't just turn the lights back on and restart research. Similarly, foreign aid. You can't just restart foreign aid. You have to reopen offices, reopen procedures, hire new staff, train new staff,
I think I may have
develop
already.
like culture around that aid, right?
I think I already talked about this before, but we live in a capitalist society. Our federal government, our federal agencies are geared towards a for-profit stability of the American economy. Like, you talk about foreign aid as if it's foreign aid. That's not what it is.
Right.
It's not what it is. What it is it's a farming subsidy that keeps farms working, even if we don't need their production right now, we want them to be there. Sort of like the post office isn't always like most profitable, but we want to be able to have that network. We want this infrastructure for a stable, healthy food economy or whatever else it is. So all of that foreign aid that we're giving away to foreign countries, we don't give them anything but the end product. We spend that money on U.S. farmers. Those are all like food stamps. People will say, oh, we got to get those people off of food stamps. That's a farming subsidy. That keeps small farmers in business. That keeps more farms working than the economy can handle at any given time. And we all pull together to make sure that our food source is 100% stable. So there's a drought. So there's a flood. So there's a blight. Because we've been doing all this farm subsidies, we still have farms that can take up that slack if we ever need it. And then maybe the foreign aid diminishes because we're in an emergency situation. But the whole point of it has nothing to do, really, ultimately with, I mean, there's people who care about these things, about foreign aid and about helping people relieving suffering.
No, but also a huge piece of foreign aid is preventing disease from ending up here also. So when you do disease prevention in other countries, you're preventing it from spreading to us also. So there's like many selfish reasons to do that as well.
And we're also then learning how to handle it if it happens here.
Absolutely.
We're also getting all the tools that we need to come up with a monoclonal antibody that some nameless federal employee mooching off the system can save the life of a president who then is ungrateful, unaware, and uninformed maybe, and fires the guy. So...
yeah. Well, and of course, Laura in the chat room says we're going to have to hope science doesn't stop in the rest of the world. True. Also, we funded that a lot, and we're not going to be doing that. That's part of what USAID also did, was funded research in other countries. So that's fun.
Can I tell you, I've been doing a lot of science writing. When I'm not doing this show, every day I'm writing articles for Medical Express and phys.org, mostly covering the medical beat. And I can tell you affirmatively that the best, most interesting, most cutting edge technology in fighting disease takes place in the United States. There's a lot of research from China, but guess what? It's under an authoritarian government that wants specific types of incomes for specific types of reasons, and the science isn't that great. There's Europe, which have a lot of brilliant people, but not, I mean, and they have some science funding, but they don't have the, you're not going to see the cutting edge gene therapies or new versions of CRISPRs really emerging there. They're mostly doing a lot of, meta studies where they're looking at other research that's already taken place and seeing if they can get.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of that
like
capitalist society thing. We have a lot of biosciences. We have a lot of pharmaceuticals that are for profits. Yeah. And so if it's going to be profitable, it's going to be a lot of research happening in the United States.
And that's why we have those things. It's because it's very profitable. Like, the joke in all of this is that the people have pooled their money together through their representatives and then just spent it on waste. It's so ridiculous. All of these things, even if it's not the best research project, and this is an analogy I used last week, but you were here, so I'm going to use it with you. You can't pick winners and losers as the only things that you can't just pick the winners in science research. It's not how it works. You fund the field. And you have some smart people who kind of dole out which direction or what types of studies they want to fund. But you fund the field of science. The alternative would be, well, we're going to have another NFL season. Why bother having all those teams that didn't even get like half the, 50% by the end of the year wins? We'll leave those teams out this year. And then every year, you just leave out more and more teams. And it's like, who won the Super Bowl last year? Well, it was one of the two teams that are left in the league because we only have two now. Oh, we'll have them play again. Actually, why even play the game if we already know who won? Like, that's the ridiculousness of, like, we're only going to fund research that is good research. Like, you don't know what that is. You fund the field. And much like farm subsidies, some science research is, I think, scientist subsidy. You want these people in the field. You want them to keep working. Give them a project now that they can work on for this year. It might not be the most important thing that we would get from them. But, you know, in 10 years when they're a seasoned professional and they come up with a discovery that revolutionizes things, it's because they spent 10, 20 years doing grant research on another iteration step on looking into one problem.
And are you subsidizing research to keep a lab open that grad students are moving through that are going to be future scientists, right? That's another thing. You want to keep research going. Right. But of course, you know, the idea of investing in education is also something that's
it's sort of like the old view, and it had a name, and I can't remember what it is. That maybe you know. That animals were just continually put on the earth by a creator of some sort, so you couldn't overhunt deer. You couldn't put any animal into extinction because the creator just makes more out there in the forest somewhere. Like, this is a real belief for most of human history, that there was an infinite number of animals that just, you took one and another one appeared. Fine. There was just no understanding that you're salting the fields that the crops are growing in. There's not going to be crops next year. Like, this is how short-sighted it is. But I kind of get it, especially now with the flat tax on consumer goods. That's a tax on the poor and the working class and the middle class. The tax cuts that only go to rich people. The getting rid of the raising taxes on with the tariffs, which is probably going to raise a lot of money actually, through increased inflation. And they haven't like given back money that they're saving supposedly from all these cuts. What they're basically going to do is just allow the wealthiest part of this society to keep more money and have more control and more power and less regulation. It's going to be uncentralized government. It's going to be the ununited states is the vision. Where each state is its own fiefdom ruled by the richest person in that state or the person with the most political or power and influence. And you'll have all these individual fiefdoms that will then start bickering and fighting over borders and water rights and everything else. And they want they're anti-America. Because that's what America is. It's the socialist collective of all these states and all these people putting taxes in for a common good. They're anti-America. They don't want there to be America. They want there to be Georgia, and Georgia does what Georgia does. And Nebraska does what Nebraska does. And the fact that they got people in those farming states to vote against immigrants who are doing all of the work. Like, do they imagine that all these college kids are going to be like, oh, hey, I heard that there's nobody making sub-minimum wage on your farm. I guess since they closed my school, I'll go work on a farm because that's like.
Well, they don't always want states' rights, though. Sometimes they want to federally outlaw things. So then it's not up to the states. So it's really, it's a pick and choose scenario, but. But, you know, Eric's right in the chat. You know, we live in a capitalist society, which has a lot of drawbacks, but there are certain things that money is behind, and I am not freaking out as much as I maybe should be about RFK being in charge of Health and Human Services, because pharmaceuticals have a lot to gain by vaccines being offered. And so I'm not as scared of vaccines going away because of all of the money that would be left on the table from Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Moderna if suddenly vaccines started to disappear. So I feel pretty confident we're going to keep our vaccines. I think it's going to be okay because there's money there.
There's a movie, I think it's from Brazil. Is it Brazil is the movie I'm thinking about? No, I'm a little bit confused. I think it's in Brazil. But there's a terrorist that the police are looking for, and they're barging into people's houses looking for this terrorist. Finally, at some point, you meet the terrorist. And he's, I think, a HVAC repairman. Who's like, his job is now illegal, but he's still going around fixing people's heating and cooling in this giant building. Sometimes rappelling down the side of the building. But he's a terrorist because he doesn't have a permit to do the work anymore. Like, you know, they're breaking due process. Like, they're breaking due process. Like, there's nothing. And they're talking about, you know, changing the fact that somebody can only be elected twice, and saying, well, but it doesn't say they can't be president 3 times. It says they can't be elected more than once. Because there was, in the documents of the Constitution and all of this, there was, I think, an overassumption of common sense in that room for the public that they were writing these things for at some point. And I think we're now seeing the result of a little bit of loose legal language in that executive branch. Anyways, you were saying something about needing to sleep.
Yeah, we're in uncharted waters. Let me just say, I feel like we need to support each other. It's really important. Just like I was talking about with climate change, it's important to hear that other people believe what you believe. It's also really important to hear that you're not the only person sitting here watching what's happening, going slowly insane. Like, it's very helpful to have conversation. It can't be all you do, because you're going to probably end up very depressed. But it's okay to have conversations where you talk about, like, this is crazy, right? And somebody can go, yes, this is crazy. Just so you can feel a sense of community. You can feel kind of like an empathetic connection towards somebody else. You can be reminded you're not alone, because that is where we get got, is when we feel alone and helpless. And so that's what I kind of want to remind everyone of, is we are not helpless. We are not alone. This is unprecedented and terrible, but there is a way out of here. And the way out of here is together. So that's my 2 cents for the evening.
And I think the administration is putting people together faster than they took us apart, because you're starting to already see a lot of head scratching. Like, this is not what I voted for.
Yeah, this isn't cheaper eggs.
You just raised my taxes.
Yeah,
like people aren't realizing that these tariffs are sales tax on most Americans. That's and it's a sales tax on you so that richer people don't have to pay taxes. That's what it is.
Yes, I asked for cheaper eggs, and instead, trucks are twice as expensive, and you deported my husband. Like, that's not what I asked for.
No,
that's not.
But to people who have incomes that are decimal point differences than yours. Like, I was trying to do this analogy, and I have a hard time with it. But say you make $100,000 a year, and that new truck you were looking at is $50,000. Well, now it's going to be $65,000. That's a big difference. Yeah. Now, if you make $1 million a year, it's the equivalent of that car going from that truck going from $5,000 to $6,500. You're right. Still in the budget. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And if you make $10 million a year, that $500 car is now $650 car, and you're still not looking at it because it's a cheap old little thing. Like, why would I buy a cheap car like that? Then you make $100 million. We're not even at the billionaire class yet. You make $100 million, and that $50 equivalent purchase is now a $50 equivalent purchase for that same truck went to $65. Whatever. Who cares? Not me. Now you're not just at 100 million, which, by the way, a lot of the people you'll see on the Fox Newses and the Joe Rogans, they're above that category, 100 million. They're up there. Now you talk about $1 billion. Now you're talking about, the price of cars is going to go from $5 to $6.50.
Okay.
Just pay the extra $1.50, like whatever. Like, what are you talking about? It's so ridiculous. So what? Doesn't make any sense to them when we talk about inflation or raising the prices of common goods that normal.
And if you
people
make
struggle
$100
with.
billion,
It's such
Then it's
an
5 cents.
insignificant
Yeah.
change, and I don't understand why people are being angry and being jerks about it.
yeah.
I really
cents.
don't understand why people, the anger and the hostility. It just seems that somebody must be paying them to think these things.
Yep. Anyway.
Anywho,
All right. Well, this was fun. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Say goodnight, Justin.
good night, Justin. Say good night, Blair.
Good night, Blair. Good night, everyone.
Good night, minions.
Good night. Good night. Have a great evening. See you next week. Goodbye.